Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of Fly the Line. As always, I'm your host Dylan Gore, and this is episode 2. Now, I did promise at the end of the last episode that I would go more in depth about how my flying dream, I suppose, how that really sat with my family over the years and how that's kind of changed, and some other things. But I thought about maybe leaving that for another time because today I wanted to make mention about the theme music of this podcast, or the intro music and the outro music. And so some very observant listeners out there will notice that I have in fact credited what the music is, right? I have credited what the song is, and it's actually a song called Ocean Breeze, by an artist named Sam Greenfield. Make sure to go check him out. He is very cool. Because um, Ocean Breeze. The reason I chose Ocean Breeze, well, actually, some people will think, some people have said to me, why did you choose the Mario Kart soundtrack? Why did you choose a song that sounds like I'm gonna go for a race in Mario Kart as your theme music? And I have to explain to them, yeah, in some ways you're right, but in some other ways, Mario Kart music is also is your name for it, but I think the name that they're actually searching for is something called Japanese jazz fusion. And so yeah, Ocean Breeze is is obviously Sam Greenfield was heavily inspired by um, various pieces and various artists from Japanese jazz fusion in the making of Ocean Breeze. But what does Japanese jazz fusion even mean, right? Let's pause right there. That's a lot to unpack there, right? You're probably sitting there going, what is this guy talking about? So jazz, right? Jazz as a whole. Where did my story with jazz begin? Well, I think I think my earliest conscious, I think that my memory of the first conscious point in my life where I became, knowledgeable about jazz, as a genre of music, I think that really came in year eight. But before that, honestly, I had already been in interaction with jazz, and a lot of people won't realize that they have, because what I'm about to say might come as a bit of a shock, but Pokemon. Pokemon was my first interaction with jazz. For those of you, and I'm sure a lot of you who grew up playing the Pokemon games, I want to tell you that was jazz. If you like Pokemon music, you like jazz, because that is Japanese jazz fusion. The Pokemon games took their entire kind of their sound from that of traditional Japanese jazz fusion, and I'll go into why that's the case later. But yeah, I remember when I was like, I was probably 7 or 8. It was yeah, really early in primary school, and my dad gifted me this 3DS, this Nintendo 3DS, on one of my birthdays, and I absolutely loved it because he bought me Pokemon Alpha Sapphire as well, and I played that game religiously. I absolutely loved it. And obviously that was the start of a Pokemon, a love of Pokemon in my childhood. But I didn't realize at the time because years later, even in like junior high school and things, when I first entered high school, I'd be like, okay, let's say it's like when you're studying and things, and you want to listen to something, right? Maybe I hadn't found lo-fi back then, but I was kind of like, okay, well, let's put on some relaxing Pokemon music, right? You search online, you search a relaxing Pokemon music, and usually a lot of stuff will come up, right? And I enjoyed that, but I didn't realize that that's technically jazz. But I will say, but then back to year eight, right? I remember, so year eight was still during the lockdown period. This was around roughly 3 to 4 years ago, right? Everybody was still in lockdown, and I don't think I mentioned this before. Yeah, so I play a number of instruments. I think my main instrument is flute. And that's been something that I've been learning since year three. So that's I've learned flute for a number of for 8 years now. I think, yeah, 8 years. Yeah. But I also play saxophone. And I actually taught myself saxophone in year eight because of this. Because essentially what happened was, so my dad is a massive Mando pop listener, right? And so all of the stuff that I suppose I kind of started hearing on the car with him, starting to go into the high school and stuff was all Mandopop, which I'll go into. I will actually go into that later as well. About all my Mandopop tastes. And so essentially on the car one day, he put up this jazz tune that he had found on YouTube. And so back to the whole thing about instruments and stuff. So I was in orchestra at the time, and essentially what happened was, because orchestra, especially those large wind orchestras where you have a lot of wind instruments, that's not great for being a COVID friendly space, right? That's basically a COVID incubator if everybody sits in a room. So essentially, the workaround for many bands at the time, and especially for mine, especially for my orchestras, the workaround at the time was to hold orchestra online. Yeah, it was usually done via either Zoom call or Microsoft Teams or something. I remember like sitting at my desk, flute in hand, and we would just be just playing to a recording and things, and our conductor would kind of just like mime conducting across the screen. And yeah, so during the COVID era, that was the way that orchestras ran, and that was no different for jazz bands, right? For those bigger jazz bands. And so essentially, what had happened was, this jazz band, the jazz band's name is Eric Miyashiro. So Eric Miyashiro, sorry, is this Japanese trumpeter, and he is the conductor and slash the lead trumpetist of the Blue Note Tokyo Jazz Orchestra. And so the Blue Note Tokyo is this really famous jazz club, right? It's this very popular, this amazing jazz club in Tokyo. And so their resident orchestra, which is the Blue Note Tokyo Jazz Orchestra, they moved online during that time as well. And my dad happened to come across it one day, and he listened to it and he was like, "Oh, this is pretty cool." And so he shared it with me on the car ride one day, and I was like, "Wow, okay, this is amazing." And so it was like a concert in isolation. Is where so essentially all the jazz orchestra members had kind of like recorded their own parts, and they all compiled it together into one big kind of recording, right? This one big YouTube video. And I remember listening to that on the car, and I was like, "Wow, this sounds phenomenal," right? I've never heard anything like this before. This sounds absolutely amazing. And I remember the chart that they played was Trains. Yes, Trains. They also played another one, Bridge Over Troubled Water. Yes, the Simon and Garfunkel one. But they arranged it into a big band chart. And I remember listening to those two. And at the start, I actually didn't really like it. Yeah, true. Yeah, it was amazing. But I found a few parts of the song's obnoxious. Even I was like, okay, why is the drums, why is there such a long drum solo, right? It doesn't make any sense, and also what's with all the random notes that this guy is playing, the saxophonist. And but I think as I listened to it more and more, I kind of fell in love with the whole idea of jazz as a whole more. And that was the reason that motivated me to go self-learn saxophone. Yeah, I taught myself saxophone. I didn't get any extra help. Maybe a few lessons from a friend at school, but yeah, mostly just off of YouTube videos and also by myself. Yeah, those listening to that directly inspired to pick up a saxophone and learn it. And I suppose that was the first point in time where I became conscious of jazz as a whole, right? And then after that I really kind of realized, I think it was halfway through year 9 or something, did I realize, oh, this is the genre that I'm looking for. So let's try and decompose jazz a little bit here. So jazz is a very, very big genre, right? Jazz is a very, very big genre of music. It's not like some other ones where we can have like let's say Western music, right? Or like country music. Country music, even though it has I do recognize that it definitely has changed in style and features and stuff over the years, as we come closer to the present, right? But jazz has evolved in many more ways than that. I suppose for country music, you listen to like an old one and you listen to a new, I suppose a more new or more modern a country song. They still have the same kind of instrumentation, the same kind of ideas, and the same kind of sound, but really with jazz, it has changed. Like, it has changed a ridiculous amount. Like, jazz originally had its roots in what we call Dixieland jazz. So the traditional kind of jazz that you would think about, that's called Dixieland or New Orleans jazz, because yeah, that's where jazz really came from. It came from things like ragtime at the time, right? And it also it was founded on things, and like those distinctive jazz rhythms and stuff. They were founded on things, these cultural influences, especially from the Afro American and Latin American communities, right? In fact, like things, and so obviously, building on those influences, you would hear, when you think of jazz, you think of swing, right? And you think, and you also think of the blues, right? Yeah, that's all jazz. But as jazz, so this was during the 20s. This was during the 1920s when jazz was really making an impact in the Roaring Twenties, right, in America. But as time went on, jazz became so much more multifaceted. With all these different cultural changes. This change in popular culture and all these things, and you would also, you have new technologies and new kind of art forms coming out. And so jazz has evolved to encompass a very wide range of things nowadays. A lot of forms of jazz sprung up both from traditional jazz, but it also sprung up as a direct result of other genres bleeding into jazz. Say, like especially as time went on, forms such as bebop, which was definitely led by like Charlie Parker and things, right? And then um, you also have smooth jazz, which really took off as kind of a mix of R&B and other things. And so yeah, like think of elevator music. That's usually smooth jazz, right? Like think of an elevator in a really fancy schmancy hotel. Like that's usually smooth jazz. You got a nice saxophone. Yeah, and that's due to a lot of different influences, right? Especially a lot of modern influences. But what I wanted to talk about today is jazz fusion. So jazz fusion, I think you can tell by the name, jazz fusion is very much so a blend of jazz, or all the good parts of jazz, right? So you've got like the funky jazz harmony. Sorry, I shouldn't say funky because that in a music way, it means something different. Like really amazing jazz harmony and like stuff like improvisation, right? All those solos and stuff. But we're combining it with the really awesome parts from other genres of music at the time. And so jazz fusion really took off in the 1960s, right? And it took with it a lot of different influences, such as from rock, and rhythm and blues, and also yeah, like uh, and especially later on as well. Definitely, I think disco, right? Disco also made a mark on it. And funk and all those these genres of music, they found their mark in jazz fusion. And so yeah, especially during the 1960s, it really started off in the States. But I think what is really important, and what I actually want to talk about today, is this jazz fusion. It made its way over to Japan, right? And so when it made its way to Japan, in the 1960s and things, it made a massive mark on the Japanese music industry, which if you listen close enough, you can still hear remnants of today. Because the the idea of jazz fusion really rose in Japan with the establishment of bands such as T Square and Cassiopeia and Masayoshi Takanaka, right? These artists really pioneered the kind of the Japanese jazz fusion sound. And so they, so these, it was these bands that popped up on my YouTube algorithm, when I was in year 9, and I took a listen and I immediately fell in love. I was like, okay, I love what I heard before, but this, I realize now that this is exactly what I meant by like I like Pokemon music, right? So I like Mario Kart music. This is literally it. And yeah, there's a reason for why people go like, oh, your, the stuff that you listen to sounds like Mario Kart music, and that's probably the compliment that people gave me the most when I wrote my HGC Music 2 composition. because I wrote it based off of Japanese jazz fusion, and they were like, "Why have you written a Mario Kart sound?" And I say, "Well, technically, you're not wrong, because like not just Pokemon, but like if you played any kind of Japanese game back in the day, like say like a Japanese, any kind of JRPG, I guess, and all those other ones made by Nintendo and Sony back in the day, and even now, I think even now, excuse me, yeah, no, the soundtrack of those, the reason why people like the soundtrack of those, and they say these soundtracks have a really kind of unique sound, right? The kind of the video game, the Japanese video game sound, is because the soundtrack lays its roots in Japanese jazz fusion. Yeah, it's very cool. It's very cool. And so after I realized, oh, I actually really like listening to this type of music, I think it then like completely took over my music taste, and I am proud to say that I'm going to say that I think 75%, even 70 to 75% of my music taste nowadays really is just Japanese jazz fusion, because I love it so much. Because if you listen to it, there is this type of very specific, there's this vibrance, this really really bright sound in it, and this kind of this amazing feeling that this kind of music brings. You find yourself wanting to dance with most of the pieces, because they are funky, they're upbeat, but they've also got this level of sophistication in them that you don't see in anything else, right? I don't really like mainstream pop music. I find it bland, and I think many people will agree with me out there that yeah, modern day pop music is a bit bland, right? Fun, easy to play, right? Easy to play, but that can mean a variety of things, right? I can probably play a bunch of like pop tunes on my guitar, right? I also play guitar. I can probably play at least half of the pop tunes that are trending out there with just a few chords on guitar. What I can't do is play a Japanese jazz fusion sound, because the level of jazz harmony that has been preserved is amazing, right? And so Japanese jazz fusion, and so naturally Japanese jazz fusion gave way to what many of you out there will know as city pop. And so I argue that city pop is probably more recognizable of a name for most, because it had this massive resurgence, right? It had this massive resurgence just a few years ago, because of the whole vaporwave aesthetic, right? When people were pushing the kind of the vaporwave vibe on the internet, what that did was it sampled all of these city pop songs, and that's how people started to know about them. And like if I say a few names now, maybe you'll know them, maybe you won't, but if you listen to them, definitely you will. One that makes its way a lot on social media is Miki Matsubara's "Stay with Me" or "Mayonaka no Doa." That's a big one, right? And then you have Maria Takeuchi's Plastic Love. That's also a massive one on the internet. Naturally, I listen to a lot more stuff. I listen to Junko Yagami, Yurie Kokubu. You've got S Kiyotaka and his Omega Tribe. But yeah, you're probably listening to me saying all these different sorry, and also we can't forget Reiko Nakahara. I'm pretty sure, yeah, Reiko Nakahara, with Love Prism and stuff. Yeah, like I'm probably saying all these names and you won't understand a thing, right? You'll be like, what is this guy saying? Right? Well, who are all these people? Who are all these artists? Trust me, search each and every one of them up. Play the first song that comes up, right? You will recognize it immediately, because it is I think city pop has made this amazing revival in these past few years on the internet. Definitely aided by a lot of different things, but I think it's also because of the mysterious YouTube algorithm, right? Um, and so city pop carries with it this really really unique sound that I wouldn't find anywhere else. You wouldn't find anywhere else, right? And that's because yeah, it's definitely it builds off of Japanese jazz fusion, within itself. But yeah, no, because it kind of existed in the same kind of time period, right? Or I'm inclined to say maybe a little later than the establishment, like the proper establishment of fusion in Japan. And why does it have that distinct sound? Well, that's for a lot of reasons. But the main reason is because Japan was going through a major period of economic prosperity at the time, right? Most of the stuff that you'll see in like city pop songs, you'll find, like if you look like at an Henri album, if you look at Henri's Timely album, almost all of them are going to be talking about like summer or love, right? At the big city, right? Or the beach, right? These really sunny, these bright ideas and these things and these sounds, right? Or yeah, all of these things, they're a direct result of Japan's relative economic prosperity during the latter half of the 20th century, right? And so naturally that kind of idea has faded. Nevertheless, Japan has continued to develop as a first world country, but that era of sound has unfortunately slowly died out over time, but it is experiencing a resurgence, which I'm really glad is the case, because a lot of people should be listening to city pop because it's amazing, right? Um, so yes, that's jazz fusion and that's city pop, and those things make up most of my music taste nowadays. That and also a little bit of that, and so naturally I listen to some other forms of jazz as well, right? It's not like I just listen to just those specifically. I do listen to a lot of it, but obviously I listen to a lot of traditional stuff as well. I like bebop a lot. And people will usually recognize that word from Cowboy Bebop, and I don't blame you, because the entire soundtrack of Cowboy Bebop, the famous anime about the space cowboy, yeah, that was it's all composed by an amazing composer called Yuji Ono, as part of the band Seatbelts, right? And people usually recognize the tune Tank, from the opening sequence of Cowboy Bebop. So yeah, that I suppose that's kind of bebop for you, and then you have naturally the actual traditional bebop artists. I'm talking about like I mentioned before, Charlie Parker is a big one, Mr. Yardbird himself. And then other than that, let's see, what else do I listen to? I also listen to a lot of like modern day jazz fusion, I guess. Um, I think my friends will be happy that I mentioned these. But yeah, like people like can Cory Wong count? I guess he can. I think Cory Wong is more funk, but I think yeah, a lot of jazz as well, jazz influences. So Cory Wong, Dirty Loops, these artists, they have a very distinctive. I think they're kind of the modern form of jazz fusion. And they've combined, I guess, their sound with predominantly other genres as well. I think that's just a natural evolution, right? That's just a natural evolution of culture as time goes by. Listen to that, and then yeah, and then the other half is just Mando pop, and then yeah, so Mando pop. My Mando pop tastes are entirely from my parents, right? My Mando pop taste is essentially just completely founded on the fact that I listened to it on the car a lot as a kid. And it's funny because there's actually a name. I'm pretty sure I'm not sure if it's named or not, but yeah, there's a phenomenon, a social phenomenon, that they once that is like recognized. Essentially, it's like when it's like when your parents, like say like my parents, they immigrated from China. When they immigrated over, obviously they grew up in the late 80s, early like the 90s and the 2000s, right? So they came over in the 2000s. So they would have brought all of the relevant cultural material at that time. And so they've just been living with that kind of cultural capital, and while they're living here in this foreign country, right, which is for me Australia. Excuse me. But yeah, and so yeah, so my dad, so I've been listening to like a lot of old Chinese songs, I guess, since I was a kid. For my Chinese listeners out there, I think for my dad, it's probably most probably gonna be like people like Zhou Huajian and Pu Shu, and then who else do we have? Oh, my dad also likes to listen to Jolly. I guess he's a bit more modern, but he still counts. And then for my mom's definitely a lot of Zhou Jielun, and then Lin Junjie, and then I guess my mom's a little bit more upcurrent. But yeah, no, but they listen to stuff that is more old than new, I guess. And so like stuff that obviously I've listened to as a kid, but like when I go back to China and I tell my relatives, I was like, oh, I really love this song. I was like, oh, I'm on a car ride, say with my uncle or something when I'm back in. I remember this. I was on a car ride with my uncle, back in my hometown in China, and I was like, oh, let me put on this song by this particular artist. I can't remember which one. And he was like. He's like, dude, we don't even listen to that anymore. Like, that's crazy. Like that you guys still listen to this. I'm like, damn, you know. Yeah, it's a funny phenomenon because because then like obviously the kids of these first generation immigrants, so the second generation immigrants, like which is me, like you would go back to the country where you were originally from, where your family was from, and you realize that your cultural taste is like what 40 years ago, right? Or like, or at least I'm gonna say at least 20 years ago, which is really interesting, which is really interesting. But I think yeah, like my entire kind of Mando pop tastes and things definitely came by my parents. And yeah, so so I listen to a lot of city pop, jazz fusion, Mando pop, and then obviously there's just a variety of different other things, right? A lot of things that I like to listen to and that I can tolerate. But like and usually these are like at select occasions as well. Like say if I'm trying to get hyped up for some exam or something, naturally I'm going to listen to, I don't know. I'm probably gonna listen to some rap, right? I'm probably gonna listen to Travis or Kanye or something. And then in other times, right? Yeah, and then in other times when I'm not feeling all that great, or I just want to chill or a bit, I may or may not listen to some indie. I think I used to listen to a lot of indie. I guess a little less now. One thing you'll never catch me listening to is like just regular pop music. I think it's bland. I think a lot of you will agree with me. I think Sabrina Carpenter is overrated. Hot take, but I think it is. That and also, yeah, I don't get the hype with Taylor Swift or The Weeknd. Or actually, no flack to my guy The Weeknd. That guy actually puts out some nice stuff because he samples city pop. Did you know that? Did you know that? Who else? Who else do we got? And then yeah, dude, I don't listen to mainstream pop. I find it really kind of commercial, and I really don't. Maybe it's just because it's too overplayed on media platforms, I guess. But for some reason, it really doesn't do it for me. Um, and then I don't know. Maybe other times you might listen to me. No, sorry, you might find me listening to. Um, what else do I listen to? Oh, maybe, maybe at times, I guess, very select times, would I listen to classical as well. And you know, there are, and I think a lot of people like this. There's this one, I suppose. Well, when I say classical, it's like kind of people's idea of classical music. So like just music that's just old, I guess. Naturally, to a music student like me, classical is a very misleading title. There's a specific period of music which is called the classical period. That you know, but like when I say classical music, I mean like I listen to charts and sorry charts. I listen to pieces like I think a lot of people will know this one, especially if you're a music geek. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto Number 2, amazing, right? Amazing. And like if you and for the average listener, if you listen to it, you'll recognize it because it's also made its way onto TikTok and other things. I think yeah, I like to listen to a lot of romantic stuff. Romantic as in romantic era, like romanticism. Romantic stuff like in general, okay. In the genres that I listen to, I guess. But yeah, so that is my kind of that's my breakdown of my whole music taste, I guess. And I know I was going to talk about I know I was going to talk about more about the flying thing and also some other aviation things today. But yeah, I think that would be a story best suited to later. I think I have a better way to segue into that as a topic. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed my rambling today about Japanese jazz fusion. Please go listen to it. Please, really, like if you want to listen to something, like I'm gonna cue the outro music like right now. If you want to hear something like this, go check out Sam Greenfield and also go check out all the other stuff that I said before. Right? Make sure to go check out like jazz fusion and stuff. I really, really want to put you guys on it. But yeah, I think that's been me for today. Thanks for listening to Fly the Line podcast, and I will see you guys next week. Bye bye.